Well, good morning. Welcome to Dominion Life Now. I'm your host, Craig Blake, and I appreciate you tuning in today. If you have your Bibles, pen, paper, grab them, and let's go to Bible school. We are looking this morning at the most important principle, the most essential principle, which is simply this, the principle of moral obligation. Now, moral obligation simply means this. Every person, when I say every person, I mean every person, not just saved. Every person is responsible before God to dedicate themselves to the same end that God has dedicated himself. Essentially, that's it. Now, what that means is this. That means that whatever God has deemed important and that he has dedicated himself to, you have to dedicate yourself to. Now, because God is God, the first thing that is most important of all is to recognize him as God and the fact that all mankind is subject to him. And therefore, we are designed to bring him glory and to worship him as God and to recognize him as God. That's why the first commandment is that we should have no other gods before him. And so when we talk about moral obligation, we are talking about a person dedicating themselves, as I said, to whatever God has dedicated himself. You say, well, what has God dedicated himself to? Actually, to the ultimate good of all mankind. Now, I know that sounds kind of strange, but we can see that in all that God has done. Everything God has done, from even before the foundation of the earth, was dedicated toward man's best good. And man's best good is that he worship God as God. That's the best thing a man can do. Now, secondly, man's best good that God has dedicated himself to is to make sure that all men know him. And when I say men, of course, we're talking about both genders, and there's only two. And so all men are to worship God and to know him as God. Now, in saying that, it also means that what man has to do is that he has to dedicate himself to making sure that all people know God as God. Now, it's really very simple if you see this, because this goes right to the heart of what the very first thing, one of the first commands that God gave mankind was to what? Not just have dominion, but to be fruitful and multiply. And if you look, and we'll even see this here toward the end of the session, if you look at it, you'll find that Jesus said those exact same things, just in different words. Instead of saying, go and be fruitful and multiply, he said, go into all the world and make disciples, which is what? Multiplying. And when you make disciples and you multiply, what that means is you're being fruitful. So, on the other hand, that also means if you're not multiplying, not making disciples, you're not being fruitful. Now, that's just, you can do with that whatever you believe that God wants you to do with it. But the bottom line is you really can't get around that. So, we're going to look at this. I'm going to give you a couple of real quick scriptures here because our sessions like this, the time goes very quickly. And so we're going to look at number one. Moral obligation is the basis for all civilization. Now, there are some things that, and it's funny because people talk about these things, there are some things that people say, well, that's religion. Okay, but that's society, or that is just the culture. And so we have to realize here that what we're talking about are people having to understand what is built into mankind. Now, when God created mankind, all mankind has built into them the need and desire to worship. Now, they are born to worship God in the sense that that is who and what we're supposed to worship. But when man does not know God as God, they will always worship something else. And so there will always be a turn to something, and hence the need for the first commandment, that you will have no other gods before God. Now, if we look at, and I would even say that the basis or that moral obligation being the basis of all civilization, what that means is that every person has within them the knowledge that they are morally obligated to do the most good for the most people for the longest time. That is in man. That's why man achieves the things he does. That's why he invents the things he does. That's why that they search for things the way they do, and they are always trying to make things better, even though, unfortunately, with man's fallen nature, better isn't always what God considers better. But it is in man to always do what is meant to be done. Now, and what God meant for them to do. So I'm going to give you a couple of scriptures. In Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13, it says, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. And here it is. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Think about that. All he says is very simple. Fear God and keep his commandments. Isn't that amazing? That's just super simple. And he says this is the whole duty of man. Then in Matthew 22, verse 36, they ask Jesus, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, it says, Therefore all things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Enter ye, now notice right after that, most people stop just there. I'm going to read the next verse, verse 13. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Then, of course, verse 14 follows up and says, Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leads unto life, and few there be that find it. Now, that ought to concern people. It says that the way into life is a narrow path, and few there be that find it. And now we just have to define what few means. Now, we could give you different definitions on it, but basically what it's saying is that not near as many are going to find life as are going to find destruction. And it says that many try to enter in but can't find it. And so there are people that are searching but not searching for the right thing, and yet they're trying to enter life, but they're not really looking for the path that leads to life. So now we're going to look at, again, a definition of moral obligation. Because remember, this is everything. Basically, this is the essential principle of all life. Because with moral obligation comes everything else. Let me put it this way. When I was teaching this in the Dominion Bible Institute in our Bible school, I actually made the comment that if moral obligation is not a true thing in us, then if man has no moral obligation, then there is no responsibility, because obligation means responsibility. And if there's no responsibility, then essentially we are truly, just like the atheist and the evolutionist would say, that we are just pretty much the top animal at the top of the food chain, and that nothing matters. But here's the thing. If that's true, if we are simply the top animal at the top of the food chain, then nothing does matter, and that means that no one has a right to judge any person for anything. Therefore, no one could ever put anybody else in prison. Nobody could ever punish anybody for any wrongdoing, because the basis of all wrongdoing goes back to moral obligation. So, without that, nothing matters. It would just be pure anarchy and just pure chaos, which we know God is not the author of chaos. So, what we have to realize is that there is a moral obligation. Now, this goes to the heart of every person. And again, I want to reiterate, not just Christians. See, people think, well, Christians have to live by this rule, but the world does not have to. It's the same rule for everybody. And the problem is Christians are supposed to be living by that rule, and everybody else doesn't yet recognize that rule, even though there are some people who would say that's a good rule to live by. You say, Curry, what rules are you talking about? Love God, keep his commandments, love your neighbor as yourself, do to others as you would have done to you. That is the essence of it. Now, you find this, actually, in a lot of other religions, or not a lot maybe, but some other religions. You'll find this same principle. Why? Because it's in all man, and has been in man since Adam. And, if there was a pre-Adamite race, I'm sure it was in them too. I don't know. There's nothing, the Bible doesn't say that. But all I'm saying is that it is in man, it has been in man, it will always be in man, and so man always has a moral obligation to do the best good for the most people for the most time. And that means what? Getting them saved. Yep, brought it right down to the Great Commission. See, isn't it amazing? Jesus called it the Great Commandment. Love God and love your neighbor. First and second commandment. And isn't that amazing that it ties right into the Great Commission? That it goes right to that. Jesus could not tell us to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves without giving us the commission to go into all the world and do that very thing. So, now, we're going to look at a couple more of these. Another short definition of this is simply this. You, okay, I don't care who I'm talking to right now. I'm not talking to whoever's not here. I'm not talking to whoever's not watching. I'm talking to you who are under the sound of my voice or seeing this right now or hearing this right now. You must dedicate yourself to accomplish that which God has dedicated himself to accomplish. I know that sounds like a big job, and you think, well, he's God and I'm not. That's true. That's your first wise statement you've ever made, probably. So there you go. Well, here a little Summerall coming out of me today. Sorry about that. No, I'm not sorry about it. Actually, I want more. Yes, we'll take more. All right, so now, meaning, what does that mean? That means that you must truly will, which means to intend, okay, and accomplish what God wants. Now, what does that mean? See, most people nowadays say, well, you know, it's all in, well, we even say it in gifts. Well, it's a thought that counts. Oh, if that were only true. That's not true, okay? It's not just a thought that counts. Ask any woman. It is not just a thought that counts. It's the thing also. The thoughts matters, but it's a thing too. So it's not just a thought. Now, what God would say is, yeah, I hear you saying what you want to do, but you don't intend to do it. And you're not really moving to it because the intention means given the time and the ability, you will accomplish it. So really, the only thing you truly intend. Now, there's things you may wish to do. There's some things you might even kind of want to do. But wanting is not enough. You must actually do them, right? Jesus made it very clear. He said, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do the things that I say, right? So why don't you do the commandments? So we have to realize it's not just in the willing. It is in the obedient act, right? Otherwise, God could have just told Abraham, hey, Abraham, are you willing to give up your son? Yeah, I give him up. Okay, good, that's done. That's over with now. No, he didn't do that. He waited until he raised his hand with the knife and was going to plunge it into Isaac. And then he said, now I know that you fear me. Why? Because you were going to obey me no matter what. So yeah, for some reason, well, I know what the reason is. It's basically just the devil has been very successful in his campaign to try to water down grace and try to water down the Word of God to the point where people think all they have to do is think they want to do it. If I want to do it, that makes me a good person. No, it doesn't. It's what you actually do. Even bad people would say, well, I didn't want to kill the person, but I did it anyway. Now, why? Because I wanted what they had. Well, see, that right there shows you it's not just in the wanting, it's in what you actually do, right? So we have to realize, and nowadays we make it all about the motive, which motive counts, but so does action. And most people say, well, you know, deep down, he's a great guy deep down. Yeah, well, sometimes you got to go pretty deep to find that great guy because it's way if it's in there at all, it's really deep. So we have to realize that what is in you comes out through your words, it comes out through your actions, it comes out in your daily life, which means you know, and this is the thing that's amazing, you know what's right. You know, right? It is in you. It was put in you at birth, right? That's why it's called sin, because you sin because you're doing something you know isn't right. Because where there is no law, there's no transgression. And so therefore, there cannot be a sin in that sense. So really what we're getting into here is the understanding of the fact that we have a moral obligation to do the best good for the most people for the most time. I know I keep reiterating that, but it's been so lost over the years, we need to reiterate it. We need to say it regularly. Now, I want to give you a couple of other things here. Now, as we're saying, the difference between knowing to do good and doing good, that's where most people have the glitch. That's where the problem comes in. Even Paul talked about, wanting to do what was right and not doing it at one point. But he was talking about his fallen man and what it was beforehand and how sin had dominion over him at that time. Now, so if there is a glitch, I should say, at the point of origination, then every action toward the destination would be skewed and would be wrong. So you have to start from a correct basis. Now, this is the essence. This is going back to the very simple, the beginning, right? Everything comes out of this. So the ultimate obligation of every moral, which means voluntarily acting and responsible being, must be to the willing of and the performing of the best good of the entire universe. I know that sounds huge, and you think, I can't do all that. You're talking about the best good for the entire universe. No. The Hebrew people, the Jewish people, have a saying that if you save a life, you've saved the whole world. And we need to realize that everything, you might not be able to save the whole world, but you can save one. And if you can save one, and you say, well, which one am I supposed to save? The one that's right in front of you at the time. Well, as a matter of fact, I even say it stronger. Sometimes it's the one in the mirror looking back at you. That's the first one you need to get saved. But beyond that, it's those around you also. So we need to see here that you have to dedicate yourself to the ultimate good of the universe. I know that sounds big. I keep going back to that because people say, well, you don't understand. I don't have the means. I don't have the opportunity. I don't have these things. Yes, you do. You have the means right where you are. I don't care where you are. I don't care if you're in the fanciest house in the world or sitting in the mud somewhere with no house. I don't care. You have the ability to do what is right at all times. And you have the right to choose, not the right. Let me put it this way. You have the ability to choose. You don't have the right to choose, right? You don't have the right to choose right or wrong. Because if you had the right to choose right or wrong, then you could choose wrong and it would be okay because you have the right to choose that. No one has the right to choose wrong. You might need to watch this again to see that, to get that, all right? But no one has a right to choose wrong. You have the right to choose what's right, and that's really the only right you have, is to choose what is right. So you have to make that decision at all times, second by second, to do what is the right thing. Now, and that essentially comes back to what is the right thing, not for you, but for others, for those around you, because the world starts with whoever's next to you. That is your neighbor. Whoever needs your help, and if somebody next to you doesn't need your help, but somebody across the street does, guess what? They're your neighbor. If you don't know that principle, then you have to go back and study the Good Samaritan, the parable that Jesus gave about the Good Samaritan. So we can look at this. The rest of this, we're going to go quickly through it. It says here that we have to will and to perform or accomplish the best good of the entire universe, which is to accomplish the will of God, because the will of God would automatically be the highest and most beneficial will for every being in the universe. Now, again, you say, well, how do we know that? Okay, if you take this principle, this is why I call it the most essential, well, not just me, but others too, but this is why we call it the most essential principle, because if you take this and you keep backing it up and looking at the heart of it and distilling it down and making it simpler and simpler till you get to the essence of it, it is amazing, because out of this comes everything else. See, if you understand moral obligation, then you would understand you could never say God made you sick. You could never say that God did this horrible thing to you. Why? Because God has dedicated himself to the ultimate good of the entire universe. And that means the ultimate good of every individual in this universe. Now, what that also means is when you start looking at it, it says here, to give you an understanding, because fulfilling the will of God would have to be now understand, if it's in us for moral obligation, then it came to us from God, who is the ultimate moral obligation. You understand? What I mean by that is this. God would have infinitely more moral obligation than we would, even though we would have, it's the same essence, but he would have it more in the sense that he would have more responsibility. So now you understand possibly why he had to give his son to die for us. Why? Because he had a greater moral obligation. I'm not lessening it. I'm saying he still had to make the decision. It still hurt him because he is love. He doesn't just have love. He is love. And because of that, whenever he had to offer up his son, it hurt him infinitely more than it could possibly ever hurt you to give up your child. So you can imagine why. Because we have the exact same emotions. Now I'm not talking about necessarily fallen man. The emotions are there, but not to the same purpose, we would say. And so, but for God, we have the exact same emotional basis, but we just cannot always experience it to the same infinite degree God does, because God is infinite and we are not. Now, in this earthly life. Now, spiritually, yes, we too are infinite because we were created in God's likeness and his image. And so there is that infinite ability within us. That's why when you get born again and his spirit comes into you, at that moment now you can start to experience what he experiences, but even then you have to grow into understanding the fullness of it. Because generally what happens is you start to experience it and you just shut down. There comes a point where, you can sit in church services all the time. When people start to experience what people would sometimes call the presence of God, the power of God, some people call it the anointing, different things, and they just collapse. And many times that's because they're just overwhelmed with the infusion of God into their spirit, to the point where it overwhelms them physically and they just collapse. Now, other times, let's be honest, it's all flesh, and they just fall down because they think they're expected to. So, if you fall here, you better be real. We generally don't have catchers. So, we're gonna just, and if it's real, you won't get hurt. All right, so there you go. Now, so we want to finish up here by looking at, the basis of this. The best good of the entire universe, including all mankind, is to line up with and accomplish the will of the creator of the universe and of all mankind. The creator of the universe must have the overall best good of his creation in mind when he created everything, or else he would destroy his own creation, thereby revealing that his will was not for the overall good, but rather the overall bad of his creation. And this is where people, see, like I said, once you realize that God is the ultimate moral obligation authority, then you start to realize he couldn't, in and of himself, make you sick, cause this thing to happen to you, or cause these evil things to happen. And you say, well, but it worked out for the good because, when I had that heart attack, I was flat on my back in the hospital, and that's where I found Jesus. Well, I'm glad you got your heart softened at that point, but God didn't put you there, right? Why did you have the heart attack? Was it because of what you were eating? Did your arteries clog up, or what's going on? God didn't make you do that. That happened because pretty much sowing and reaping, or possibly, it's called a heart attack. And honestly, it was your heart that was attacked. We call it that. We call it the attack all the time, or sometimes even a cardiac arrest. But you ought to realize it's the devil that attacks. If God attacked, let me tell you, there would be nothing left, right? Just zip, you're gone. And God doesn't need to kill you and leave your body here. If he was he could just burn you up. You'd be gone, all right? So it's amazing. So once you realize this moral obligation principle, you start to realize that this goes all the way back and it affects every part of humanity. Because you can even look at it, even all humanity is responsible for the moral obligation that is within each person. Now, what that means is this is why you have people, well, one of the reasons, barring, okay, when you have man, okay, let me start at the base. When you have a fallen human being, there is still some good in there that they're trying to be good, right? That's why fallen man, creates religion, so that he can create something to try to climb to heaven so that he can be good. But the essence is, and even in that, that's why many times they will search for cures for this disease, that disease, and they work hard at it, and it can be a good reason why they're doing it. On the other hand, it could also be because there's money involved. So you have to look at the real motive of what's going on. But I'm saying the possibility that they're actually trying to find something to help mankind shows, because if there were no moral obligation, no one would care about any person, right? Now, look at the last thing we'll talk about here is this. Moral obligation, we would even say it goes on to the point where you are, how can I say it? The moral obligation that's in you causes you to want to do good, all right? That's just as simple as I can put it. Now, we're going to probably have to carry this on at a future time because our time has gone, but I will finish with this, right? I'll read this to you. He who does the work is not so profitably employed as he who multiplies doers. Okay, say it again. He who does the work himself is not so profitably employed as he who multiplies doers. Why? Because you're more profitable if you can multiply. Jesus knew this. That's why he gave us the Great Commission, right? So that we would multiply doers who are also multiplying other doers, and it would continue on. Now, the greatest mission on earth is the Great Commission. Every believer is to be actively engaged with the Great Commission. Everything else is second. What is the Great Commission? Simple. Go make disciples. Reproduce. Be fruitful. Multiply. That's what he's telling you. It could also be stated, as I just said, be fruitful and multiply. Now, he who does not engage in accomplishing the Great Commission is not engaged in the Great Commandment, which is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Nor are they engaged in the second, which is you will love your neighbor as yourself. So it would actually be hard to justify such a person as being a Christian. Wow, that's pretty strong, and it's pretty true. So I will leave that with you today. Listen, if you've not made Jesus Lord of your life, do so now. Don't wait for emotion. Do it now. Make him Lord. Obey him. Follow him. Do what he says. It's that simple. I didn't say it was that easy. It's just that simple. So, last but least, if there's anything we can ever help you with, be sure to write us, email us, let us know. We'll be glad to help any way we can. So until next time, God bless you. We'll see you again later. Hey guys, I just wanted to welcome you. I'm Curry Blake, General Overseer of John G. Lake Ministries. We are so glad that you have decided to take the step to investigate life teams, becoming a certified divine healing technician, getting plugged in and taking the responsibility to enter into the life that Jesus has actually died to give us. So the next step now, since you've come this far, is to simply sign up. That's how to get started. Just sign up. And when you do, now you're going to go and check your email box, and you're going to get instructions on how to become certified DHT, how to start a life team. But, you know, and maybe some of you are already within JGLM and you're already a leader at some level, and you're saying, okay, why do I have to do this? Well, it's very simple. We're putting everybody into the same system so that it works like a well-oiled machine, like we've talked about, because we want to make sure everything is working very well together. So if you are an existing leader within JGLM, we can tell you nothing's going to change. We're just gathering the information so it's all in one database, and we are going to be able to communicate with you a lot better. This is going to really solve the communication problems that we've had over the past. But it's a new day, and you get to get right into it. So sign up, do it now. Don't wait, do it now, and then check your email box. It's just that simple. So listen, I really appreciate this. Jesus appreciates this because you're plugging in and you're wanting to take responsibility. So I look forward to working with you. We're going to have a great time advancing the kingdom. God bless you.
We would like to thank our partners and friends for making today's broadcast possible. If you enjoyed today's message or would like more information and resources, please visit our website at jglm.org.
Above all things, warrior, King of kings, mighty God, Prince of peace, angel armies at his feet, lightning clouds and thunder rolls, all the earth will shake.
If you are considering partnering with us and would like to support our mission, please visit jglm.org/partners. Proceeds will go toward the cost of the television broadcast and our mission work around the world.